Hell's Angel adopts black baby. He found in a park. Years later, he received a shocking surprise. The rumble of the Harley's engine echoed through the winding back roads of rural Portland. Vince "Grizz" Mallory guided his motorcycle with practiced ease, each curve in the road as familiar to him as the faded tattoos that covered his weathered arms. At 55, his beard had more gray than black now, and the leather vest he wore felt heavier on his shoulders than it had in his younger days. The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering pines, casting long shadows across the pavement. Grizz barely noticed the natural beauty around him. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a maze of memories he couldn't seem to escape. He thought about Jenny, his daughter, and how he'd failed her. The image of her last Christmas at home flashed through his mind. She'd been thin, too thin, with track marks on her arms she tried to hide with long sleeves. That was 5 years ago. He hadn't seen her since. The bike's engine growled as he downshifted, taking another curve. The sound used to make him feel alive, powerful. Now it just reminded him of all the nights he'd spent raising hell with the angels, the fights, the raids, the things he'd done that kept him awake at night. Damn it all, he muttered behind his helmet visor, his voice lost in the wind. A wooden sign appeared ahead. Crystal Springs Park, 1/4 mile. Grizz hadn't planned to stop, but something about the quiet solitude of the place called to him. He'd been riding for hours, trying to outrun thoughts that always seemed to catch up. The park was little more than a clearing with a few picnic tables and a small playground, all of it showing signs of neglect. Grizz cut the engine, and silence rushed in to fill the void. He swung his leg over the bike, his joints protesting the movement with familiar aches. Dead leaves crunched under his heavy boots as he made his way to a wooden bench beneath an ancient oak tree. The bark was scarred with carved initials and hearts, memories of other people's happier times. Grizz lowered himself onto the bench with a grunt, removed his helmet, and ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. The afternoon was still, almost unnaturally quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just the occasional whisper of wind through the leaves above. Grizz stared at his hands, studying the knuckles that had been broken and reset so many times they looked like terrain maps. A lifetime of violence and regret, that's what these hands represented. He thought about the last bar fight he'd been in, just 2 weeks ago. Some young punk had made a smart comment, and Grizz had responded the only way he knew how. Old habits died hard. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the bench. The wood creaked under his weight, and for a moment, he let himself feel every one of his 55 years. The weight of his past pressed down on him like a physical thing. That's when he heard it. So faint at first he thought he was imagining things. A cry. Not the cry of a bird, or any animal he knew. No, this was different. This was the unmistakable sound of a baby. Grizz opened his eyes and sat up straight, his heart suddenly pounding. He listened intently, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him out here in this forgotten corner of the world. Then he heard it again. A weak, mewling cry that cut through the stillness of the park like a knife. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The faint cry pierced the stillness again. Grizz pushed himself up from the bench, his leather jacket creaking as he moved. The sound was coming from behind the massive oak tree. His boots crunched on fallen leaves as he walked toward it, each step measured and cautious. "Hello?" he called out, his gruff voice softer than usual. No answer came except for another tiny whimper. When he rounded the tree, his heart nearly stopped. There, nestled in a hollow between two giant roots, lay a bundle wrapped in what looked like an old army blanket. The fabric was worn and faded, its olive green color barely visible after years of use. Grizz knelt down, his knees protesting against the damp earth. With trembling hands, he carefully pulled back a corner of the blanket. A tiny face, the color of rich coffee, looked up at him. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, tears rolling down her perfect cheeks. "Oh God," he breathed, his weathered hands hovering uncertainly over the bundle. A piece of paper, folded and slightly damp from the morning dew, was tucked into the blanket's folds. He opened it carefully, reading the hurried handwriting. "Her name is Hope. Please give her a better life." The baby let out another cry, this one more insistent. Griz's hands, which had broken bones in countless bar fights, now moved with unexpected gentleness. He scooped up the bundle, cradling it close to his chest. The contrast between his pale, tattooed arms and her dark skin was striking. "Shh," he murmured, rocking slightly. The baby's cries softened to whimpers. She couldn't have been more than a few days old. Her umbilical cord stump was still visible, and she was so small she fit perfectly in his cupped hands. Grizz looked around the empty park, his eyes scanning every shadow and corner. But there was no one there. Just him, the trees, and this tiny life that someone had left behind. His phone felt heavy in his pocket. He knew he needed to call for help, but something made him pause. The baby had settled against his chest, her tiny fingers curling around the edge of his jacket. Her breathing had steadied, and she made small, contented noises that tugged at something deep inside him. Memories flooded back. His own daughter, lost to addiction years ago. The way she'd looked at him with such trust when she was small, before everything went wrong, before he'd failed her. With his free hand, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As he waited for the operator to pick up, he looked down at the peaceful face nestled against his chest. Her lips moved slightly in her sleep, and one tiny hand stretched out, reaching for nothing. "I've got you, little one," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Something stirred in his heart, something he thought had died years ago. It felt like hope. The baby sighed in her sleep, and Grizz felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He brushed them away quickly with the back of his hand, embarrassed, even though no one was there to see. The phone rang in his ear as he waited for someone to answer, but his focus remained on the precious bundle in his arms. The fluorescent lights of Portland General Hospital buzzed overhead as Grizz shifted uncomfortably in the small plastic chair. His leather vest creaked against the backrest, and his weathered hands couldn't stop fidgeting with his motorcycle keys. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and coffee, a sharp contrast to the earthy scent of the park where he'd found the baby just hours before. A young caseworker in a navy blue blazer approached him, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. "Mr. Mallory." She consulted her clipboard. "I'm Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services. Thank you for bringing the infant in." Grizz nodded, his throat tight. "How is she?" "The baby's doing well. The doctors say she's only about 2 days old." Sarah sat down next to him, maintaining a professional distance. "She's healthy, thankfully. A little dehydrated, but she's responding well to care." "What happens to her now?" Grizz's gruff voice was barely above a whisper. "Well, she'll be placed in emergency foster care while we conduct a search for the mother. If we can't locate her, the baby will enter the foster system permanently." Sarah's tone was gentle but matter-of-fact. "We'll do our best to find her a good home." Grizz's chest tightened. The image of the tiny bundle in his arms wouldn't leave his mind. He remembered how she'd gripped his pinky finger in the ambulance, her whole hand barely bigger than his fingernail. "The system," he repeated, thinking of his own daughter and how the system had failed her. "Just like that?" Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I know it's hard, but you've done your part, Mr. Mallory. We'll take it from here." But as Grizz drove home that night on his Harley, the empty feeling in his gut only grew. He couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in his small apartment above the auto repair shop where he worked. The baby's face kept appearing in his mind, so small, so helpless, just like his Jenny had been. His daughter's photo sat on his nightstand, showing her at 16 before the drugs took her away. The next morning, Grizz skipped his usual coffee and rode straight to the hospital. His boots echoed through the hallway as he made his way to the social services office, where he found Sarah organizing paperwork. "Mr. Mallory." She looked surprised to see him. "Is everything okay?" "I want to foster her," he said firmly, the words coming out before he could second-guess himself. Sarah's pen clattered to her desk. "I'm sorry, what?" "The baby. Hope. That's what the note said her name was." Grizz stood straighter, his tall frame filling the doorway. "I want to foster her." "Mr. Mallory," Sarah began carefully, "becoming a foster parent is a complex process. There are home studies, background checks, training courses." "Then I'll do them," Grizz interrupted. "All of them. Whatever it takes." Sarah studied him, taking in his tattoos, his graying beard, the leather vest with its patches. "This is unexpected. May I ask why?" Grizz's weathered face softened. "Because when I held her yesterday, something just felt right. Like, maybe this is my chance to do something good, to give someone the care I never had growing up." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "Everyone deserves a shot at a better life, doesn't they?" That's what the note said. Sarah sat back in her chair, clearly thrown by this turn of events. She picked up her pen and opened a fresh folder. "You understand this won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Grizz replied, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. The courtroom felt smaller than Grizz expected. Afternoon sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood floors. He tugged at his borrowed tie, the collar of his only dress shirt feeling too tight around his thick neck. His weathered hands, covered in faded tattoos, gripped the edge of the defendant's table. Judge Evelyn Hart studied him from her bench, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her stern expression gave nothing away. "Mr. Mallory," she began, her voice carrying through the nearly empty courtroom, "you're requesting temporary custody of an abandoned infant, despite having no prior childcare experience. Can you explain why?" Grizz cleared his throat. The sound echoed off the walls. "Your Honor, I know what everyone sees when they look at me." He gestured to his arms, where decades-old tattoos told stories he wasn't proud of anymore. "They see trouble. They see mistakes. And they're right. I've made more than my share." The state attorney shuffled some papers, ready to object, but Judge Hart raised her hand slightly, silencing him. "But that little girl," Grizz continued, his voice growing softer. "She didn't see any of that. When I held her in that park, she just held onto my finger. Trusted me, complete stranger that I was." He paused, swallowing hard. "Nobody's trusted me like that in a long time." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Mallory, raising a child isn't about trust alone. It requires stability, resources, commitment. I own my house outright, Your Honor. Got a good pension from the union." Grizz sat straighter. "I've been sober 15 years. Haven't had so much as a parking ticket in the last decade." "And what about your previous associations?" The state attorney spoke up. "Your history with the Hells Angels?" Grizz's shoulders tensed, but he kept his voice steady. "Left that life behind years ago. Sometimes the best teacher is a lifetime of wrong turns." He looked directly at Judge Hart. "I know what it's like to be given up on, to have people decide you're not worth the chance." The judge removed her glasses, studying him carefully. "You understand this would be temporary custody, pending further evaluation?" "Yes, ma'am." Grizz nodded. I just know that little girl deserves someone who'll fight for her. Someone who'll see her as a blessing, not a burden." Judge Hart was quiet for a long moment. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Finally, she picked up her gavel. "Mr. Mallory, against what might be my better judgment, I'm going to grant you temporary custody." She held up a hand before continuing. with conditions. Weekly visits from social services, parenting classes, regular court check-ins. Anything you say, Your Honor. Relief flooded Griz's face. Don't make me regret this, Mr. Mallory. 20 minutes later, Grizz stood outside the courthouse steps, holding a second-hand car seat. Inside, wrapped in a new pink blanket, the baby slept peacefully. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the blanket, protecting her from the cool spring breeze. Looking down at her peaceful face, he whispered, "Your name stays. Your hope." Grizz's boots creaked against the wooden floor of his modest ranch house as he carried Hope through the front door. The living room, usually a place of solitude, now felt different, like it was waiting for something more. "Okay, little one," he muttered, setting the car seat down carefully. "Let's figure this out together." The baby supply bags from the drugstore rustled as he unpacked them onto his coffee table. Diapers, formula, bottles, and wipes. They all looked like complicated puzzles to his weathered hands. Hope began to fuss, her tiny face scrunching up. Hold on, Grizz said, his heart racing. He fumbled with the car seat straps, finally freeing her. As he lifted her, she let out a sharp cry that made him freeze. What did I do wrong? He held her awkwardly, trying to remember how the nurses had shown him. His large hands, marked with faded tattoos, seemed too rough for something so delicate. The formula instructions might as well have been written in Chinese. After 3 attempts to get the mixture right, he grabbed his phone and dialed Martha, his old friend, Jack's wife. "Martha, I need help." His voice cracked slightly. "I've got this baby and I can't—" "Vince Mallory, are you serious?" Martha's voice was equal parts shocked and concerned. "Stay put. I'm coming over." Hope's cries grew louder while he waited. He paced the living room, bouncing her gently and mumbling what he hoped were soothing words. "Shh, it's okay. We're gonna get this right." 20 minutes later, Martha burst through the door with the energy of a tornado. She took one look at Grizz's panicked face and Hope's red cheeks and jumped into action. First thing, support her head better, like this. She adjusted his arms. Now, about that bottle. For the next hour, Martha showed him how to test the formula temperature on his wrist, how to burp Hope properly, and the intricate art of diaper changing. Grizz watched intently, his forehead creased with concentration. "You're sure it's not too tight?" He asked for the 3rd time as Martha demonstrated the proper way to secure a diaper. "Positive," Martha assured him, a gentle smile on her face. "You're doing fine, Vince. Just take it slow." After Martha left, Grizz faced his next challenge. Bedtime. He'd cleared out his spare room, but the crib wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. For tonight, he'd have to make do. Hope started fussing again around midnight. Grizz lifted her from the makeshift bassinet he'd created from a drawer lined with soft blankets. "Come here, sweetheart." He settled into his old leather recliner, cradling Hope against his chest. Her tiny hand curled around his index finger, and something in his heart shifted. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting a soft glow over them both. "You know," he whispered, gently rocking back and forth, "I've done a lot of things wrong in my life. Made plenty of mistakes." Hope's eyes started to drift closed as he spoke. "But maybe this time I can do something right." The gentle rhythm of Hope's breathing slowly deepened as she fell asleep in his arms. Grizz sat there, completely still, watching her peaceful face. Years of regret and loneliness seemed to melt away as he held this tiny miracle who'd appeared in his life like a sign from above. In that quiet moment, as Hope slept trustingly in his arms, Grizz felt tears well up in his eyes. Looking down at her, he thought, maybe this is what saving a soul feels like. Grizz stood in the baby aisle of the supermarket, his large frame and tattoo-covered arms drawing curious glances from other shoppers. He held up 2 different packages of diapers, squinting at the size charts. "First time dad?" A gentle voice made him turn. An elderly woman with silver hair smiled up at him. "That obvious, huh?" Grizz's gruff voice softened as he showed her the packages. "Get the newborn size," she advised, pointing to the purple package. "And remember to stock up on wipes. You'll need more than you think." At the checkout counter, the cashier watched him pile up formula, diapers, and tiny onesies. "My sister swears by this brand of formula," she offered, holding up the can. "Less gassy for the little ones." Grizz nodded gratefully. "Thanks. I'm still learning." Back home, he carefully arranged everything in the nursery he'd hastily put together. The room had once been his workshop, filled with motorcycle parts and old tools. Now it held a second-hand crib, a changing table found at a yard sale, and pale yellow curtains that the lady next door had helped him hang. The pediatrician's office was his next challenge. Dr. Martinez, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, showed him how to support Hope's head properly during examinations. "You're doing fine, Mr. Mallory," she reassured him, noticing his nervous hands. "She's gaining weight right on schedule." "The formula's okay?" he asked, watching Hope's tiny fingers wrap around his pinky. "Perfect, and you're holding her exactly right during feedings. Just remember to burp her halfway through." That evening, at the pharmacy picking up baby vitamins, an older black woman approached him. She'd noticed him struggling with Hope's hair. "Here," she said, placing a few products in his basket. "These will help keep her scalp moisturized. I can show you some basic techniques if you'd like." Grizz's eyes welled up with unexpected tears. "I'd appreciate that, ma'am. I want to do right by her." The woman patted his arm. "You already are, honey. You already are." Days blended into nights. Grizz learned to function on minimal sleep, catching naps when Hope dozed. He developed a system: bottles prepared in advance, diapers stationed in every room, and a notebook where he tracked feeding times and diaper changes. Late one night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Grizz sat in his old leather recliner, giving Hope her last bottle of the day. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated the living room, and he noticed how different everything looked. Gone were the empty beer bottles and old magazines. Instead, soft blankets draped over the couch, and a mobile hung from the ceiling, spinning gentle shadows on the walls. The shelves that once displayed his motorcycle trophies now held baby supplies, neatly organized. A stuffed elephant, a gift from the church ladies who'd heard about his situation, sat in the corner. Even the air smelled different, like baby powder and warm milk instead of motor oil and leather. Hope made a small sound as she finished her bottle. Grizz shifted her gently to his shoulder, patting her back with a practiced touch. His eyes swept across the room again, taking in all the changes. The house that had been just a place to crash between rides, a shelter from his demons, was transforming. With every baby giggle, every midnight feeding, every new day learning to be a father, it was becoming something else entirely. For the first time in years, it felt like a home. The old roadhouse looked exactly as Grizz remembered it: weathered wood siding, neon beer signs, and a line of motorcycles parked out front. He pulled his Harley into the familiar spot he'd claimed for 20 years, but this time felt different. His leather jacket felt heavier on his shoulders. Inside, cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. A few early afternoon regulars hunched over their drinks at the bar, but most of his old crew gathered around their usual corner table. Snake, the club president, spotted him first. "Well, look who finally showed his face!" Snake's voice boomed across the room. "The baby daddy himself!" Grizz made his way over, accepting rough handshakes and backslaps. These men had been his brothers for decades, through bar fights and long rides, through good times and bad. Now they looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "I'm here to say goodbye," Grizz said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm cleaning up for good. No more rides, no more late nights at the bar." Laughter erupted around the table. "You're joking, right?" Tiger, A burly man with a salt and pepper beard wiped beer from his mustache. "This about that kid?" "Her name is Hope," Grizz said. "And yeah, it is." "Man, you've gone soft," someone muttered. But Doc, the oldest member of the group, stood up slowly. His leather vest was covered in patches from decades of riding. Without a word, he pulled Grizz into a bear hug. When they separated, Doc pressed a small white envelope into Grizz's hand. "Been saving this for something special," Doc said gruffly. "Guess this counts." His eyes were warm despite his stern expression. "That little girl's gonna need clothes and such." Grizz's throat tightened as he felt the thickness of the envelope. "Doc, I can't." "You can and you will," Doc cut him off. "We may be rough around the edges, but we take care of our own. That includes your kid now." The others grew quiet, watching the exchange. Snake cleared his throat. "You really serious about this, Grizz? Leaving everything behind?" Grizz nodded, tucking the envelope into his jacket. "Found something worth more than all this. Something that needs me to be better." A few more hugs followed, along with some awkward goodbyes. Some couldn't meet his eyes, as if his decision was a betrayal. Others seemed to understand, even if they didn't say it out loud. Back home, Grizz stood in his living room, staring at his club vest hanging on its familiar hook. The patches told stories of countless miles, brotherhood, and a life he'd thought would be his until the end. With careful hands, he took it down and folded it slowly. He walked to his bedroom closet and placed the vest on the highest shelf, next to an old shoebox of memories. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about making room for something new. In the nursery, Hope slept peacefully in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Grizz picked up a framed photo of her that the hospital had taken. Her face was scrunched up, eyes barely open, but to him, she was perfect. He carried the photo to the living room and hung it above the mantel, right where his prized motorcycle photo used to be. Standing back, he looked at the baby picture and thought about the small town he'd visited last weekend. Clean streets, good schools, friendly faces that didn't know his history. That's where they needed to be. A fresh start for both of them. The small town of Pine Grove greeted them with a main street lined with maple trees and brick storefronts that hadn't changed since the 1950s. Grizz drove his pickup truck slowly past the town square, where an American flag fluttered above a gazebo. Hope cooed from her car seat, tiny fingers reaching for the sunlight streaming through the window. Their rental house sat on Cedar Street, a modest two-bedroom with white siding and blue shutters. The front yard needed mowing, and the porch had peeling paint. But Grizz saw potential. It was exactly what they needed, a fresh start. "Welcome home, little one," he said, carrying Hope up the creaky steps. Inside, boxes from their hasty move filled the living room. He'd sold most of his old furniture, wanting nothing from his previous life to follow them here. That first week, Grizz threw himself into making their house livable. He painted Hope's room a soft yellow, assembled a white crib, and hung curtains with tiny elephants that he'd picked out himself. Between feedings and diaper changes, he slowly unpacked their belongings, learning to balance cardboard boxes while holding a baby. At the county courthouse, he filed for permanent guardianship. The clerk, a kind-faced woman named Martha, helped him through the paperwork. "First-time parent?" she asked, noticing how carefully he held Hope. "That obvious, huh?" Grizz managed a small smile. "You're doing fine," Martha assured him. "Have you thought about joining any parent groups?" That's how Grizz found himself walking into the First Baptist Church on a Tuesday evening, Hope bundled against his chest. The parenting class met in the church basement, where folding chairs formed a circle under fluorescent lights. Most of the other parents were younger couples, but they welcomed him without judgment. Miss Betty, the elderly instructor, had been teaching new parents for 30 years. She took one look at Grizz's uncertain handling of Hope's bottle and stayed after class to show him proper feeding techniques. Support her head like this, she demonstrated. There you go. You're a natural. Week by week, Grizz absorbed everything he could about caring for an infant. He learned about sleep schedules, tummy time, and early development. The other parents shared tips about local pediatricians and the best places to buy baby supplies. Slowly, his gruff exterior began to soften. One evening, Miss Betty caught him after class. "We're having our monthly potluck this Sunday," she said. "You and Hope should come. The whole congregation would love to meet you both." Grizz hesitated. Large gatherings still made him uncomfortable, but he knew Hope needed more people in her life than just him. That Sunday, he dressed Hope in her prettiest yellow dress and nervously carried a store-bought pasta salad into the church hall. The room buzzed with conversation and the clatter of dishes. A group of older ladies immediately spotted Hope and flocked over. "Oh, isn't she precious?" Mrs. Wilson cooed, while Mrs. Thompson fussed over Hope's tiny shoes. "I'm Helen." Another woman introduced herself, her silver hair neatly styled. "We've heard so much about you both from Miss Betty." She reached out and took Grizz's weathered hand in her soft one. Her eyes were kind as she looked up at him. "You're doing God's work, son." Time had a way of melting like honey when happiness filled each day. For Grizz, the past 2 years flowed together in a series of precious moments with Hope. His tattooed arms, once known for their crushing strength, now cradled her with infinite gentleness through every milestone. "Come on, baby girl," Grizz would encourage, kneeling on the living room carpet with his arms stretched wide. Hope would wobble on chubby legs, her dark curls bouncing as she took hesitant steps toward him. When she finally reached his arms that first time, her delighted giggle filled the whole house. Her first word wasn't Dada, it was bike, which made Grizz laugh until tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. She'd point at his old Harley, safely stored under a tarp in the garage, and repeat it over and over. Soon enough, Dada followed, and each time she said it, Grizz felt his heart grow fuller. The little house transformed with Hope's presence. Stuffed animals perched on every surface, and bright finger paintings covered the refrigerator. Grizz learned to braid her hair by watching YouTube videos late at night, his big fingers surprisingly nimble as they wove her curls into neat rows each morning. But not everyone saw the beauty in their unlikely family. At the park, mothers would gather their children closer when Grizz approached with Hope. The whispers started soft, like rustling leaves, but grew steadier with time. "Must be the nanny's day off," one woman said to another at the playground, loud enough for Grizz to hear. "Did you see his tattoos?" another would murmur. "What kind of man is he?" Grizz learned to position himself on the bench where he could watch Hope play, while staying far enough away to not make other parents nervous. He'd wave and smile extra wide when she showed him her sandcastles, making sure his voice carried clearly. "That's beautiful, Hope. Daddy's so proud." At church, the older ladies who'd initially welcomed them still cooed over Hope, but some of their husbands kept their distance, offering only stiff nods. The younger families would smile politely, but rarely stop to chat after services. One Tuesday morning, Grizz pushed a shopping cart through the grocery store with Hope seated in front, playing with her favorite stuffed elephant. She babbled happily about the colorful boxes of cereal as they passed through each aisle. Her joy was infectious, and Grizz found himself making silly faces at her, not caring who saw. In the produce section, while Grizz was selecting apples, Hope's favorite snack, a well-dressed woman in her 60s stopped nearby. She looked from Hope to Grizz, taking in his faded jeans, his motorcycle boots, the tattoos visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves. Her face twisted into a frown. "That poor child," she muttered, just loud enough to hear, before pushing her cart away. Grizz's hand tightened around the apple he was holding. He'd faced down rival gangs without flinching, but these words cut deeper than any knife. He placed the apple carefully in the cart, then reached out to straighten Hope's bow, his touch gentle despite the tremor in his fingers. Hope looked up at him with complete trust in her bright brown eyes. "Love you, Dada," she said, hugging her elephant. Grizz swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Love you too, baby girl," he replied, but he could feel the weight of judgment settling on his shoulders like a heavy winter coat. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Grizz stood behind Hope's tiny chair, brush in hand. His large, calloused fingers trembled slightly as he tried to work through another stubborn tangle in her hair. Hope squirmed in her seat, tears welling up in her big brown eyes. "I'm sorry, baby girl," Grizz mumbled, his heart aching as he accidentally tugged too hard again. "I'm trying my best here." Hope's bottom lip quivered. "Hurts, Daddy." Grizz set the brush down on the kitchen table and ran his hand over his weathered face. The countless tattoos on his arms seemed to mock him. Here he was, a man who'd spent decades being tough, brought to his knees by a 2-year-old's hair. His chest felt tight with familiar guilt, the kind that had been creeping up more and more lately. He glanced at the row of products on the table: cheap drugstore shampoo, a regular brush, and basic hair ties. Nothing seemed to work right. Hope's beautiful curls always ended up a tangled mess, no matter what he tried. "I'm doing this all wrong," he whispered to himself. After a moment's hesitation, he reached for the phone on the wall and dialed the number Sister Louisa had given him months ago. "Hello?" Her warm voice answered on the third ring. "Sister Bennett?" Grizz's voice cracked slightly. "It's Vince Mallory, Hope's father. I need help." 20 minutes later, Sister Louisa's old station wagon pulled into their driveway. She walked up to the house carrying 2 shopping bags, her gray hair neatly tied back, wearing a bright floral dress that seemed to match her sunny disposition. "Now then," she said, stepping into the kitchen, "let's see what we're working with here." Her kind eyes took in the scene: Hope's uncombed hair, Grizz's defeated expression, and the inadequate hair care supplies on the table. "First things first," Sister Louisa said, pulling items from her bags. "You need the right tools, brother." She laid out wide-toothed combs, special moisturizing products, and soft hairbands made specifically for curly hair. Grizz watched intently as Sister Louisa demonstrated how to section Hope's hair, how to apply the leave-in conditioner, and how to detangle from the bottom up. Her gentle hands moved with practiced ease, and Hope sat contentedly, playing with a small wooden truck Grizz had made her. "The key is patience," Sister Louisa explained, showing him how to work through the curls carefully. "And these products here? They're made specifically for her hair type. That drugstore stuff just won't do." As she worked, Sister Louisa pulled out several children's books from her second bag. "These are for both of you," she said, setting them on the table. "Books about beautiful black children, about their heritage, about their hair. You'll both need these stories." Grizz picked up one of the books, his rough fingers trailing over the colorful cover, showing a little girl with hair, just like Hope's. His throat tightened with emotion. "Sister," he managed to say, "I don't know how to thank you." "You thank me by learning," she replied simply, "by making sure this precious child knows both who she is and how loved she is." She finished the last section of Hope's hair, now neatly arranged in small, protective twists. Hope beamed up at them from her spot on the floor, truck clutched in her tiny hands, her hair now properly styled for the first time. Grizz watched his daughter, overwhelmed by love and gratitude, as Sister Louisa began explaining the daily hair care routine they would need to follow. The autumn sun was setting when Hope burst through the front door, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Her bright yellow dress matched the scattered leaves outside, but her usual smile was missing. Grizz looked up from the kitchen counter where he was preparing dinner, instantly noticing the change in his daughter's demeanor. "Everything okay, kiddo?" he asked, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Hope dropped her backpack by the door and walked slowly to the kitchen table. Her small fingers traced patterns on the wooden surface. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Always," Grizz replied, pulling out a chair to sit beside her. The serious tone in her voice made his heart beat faster. "Today in class, we were drawing family portraits," Hope began, her voice quiet. "And Tommy asked why my skin is brown and yours isn't." She looked up at him with questioning eyes. "Why are we different colors, Daddy?" Griz's throat tightened. He'd known this day would come, but that didn't make it any easier. He ran his hand over his beard, buying time to find the right words. "Well, honey," he started, then paused. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. "You know how some flowers in our garden are purple, and others are yellow?" Hope nodded, her dark eyes fixed on his face. "And they're all beautiful, right? All different colors, but still flowers?" His voice was gentle, but his hands were trembling slightly. "But flowers from the same plant look the same," Hope countered, showing wisdom beyond her years. "Tommy said families should match." Griz's chest ached. He reached for Hope's small hand, engulfing it in his larger one. The contrast in their skin tones was stark, his weathered and pale, hers smooth and brown. "Tommy's wrong about that," he said firmly. "Family isn't about matching on the outside. It's about love on the inside." He tapped her chest, right above her heart. "And I love you more than anything in this whole wide world." Hope's forehead wrinkled in thought. "But where did I come from? Why don't I look like you?" Grizz swallowed hard. "God brought you to me when you were just a tiny baby. I found you, and I knew right away that you were meant to be my daughter." His voice cracked slightly. "Sometimes families are made different ways. Some by birth, some by love and choice." "Like adoption?" Hope asked. She learned that word from a girl in her class. "Something like that," Grizz nodded, his eyes growing misty. "You're my daughter, because I chose you, and you chose me right back. Remember how you wouldn't stop crying that first night until I held you?" A small smile finally appeared on Hope's face. She loved hearing stories about when she was a baby. Later that night, after tucking Hope into bed with extra hugs and kisses, Grizz sat alone in his bedroom. He opened his bedside drawer and pulled out a worn piece of paper he hadn't looked at in years. The handwriting was faded now, but the words still clear. "Her name is Hope. Please give her a better life." His large fingers traced the letters as tears filled his eyes. The simple note that had changed both their lives forever now felt heavier than ever. He knew that someday, Hope would need more than just his love. She'd need answers he wasn't sure he could give. Hope sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by crumpled papers and half-filled notebooks. Her English teacher's words echoed in her mind. "Write what you know, what moves you." The state essay contest deadline loomed just 2 weeks away, but she knew exactly what story she needed to tell. Through her bedroom window, she could see Grizz in the backyard, tending to his small vegetable garden. His massive frame bent carefully over the tomato plants, tattooed arms surprisingly gentle as he tied the vines to their stakes. The sight made her smile. "The man who saved me," she typed on her laptop. The cursor blinked expectantly. Every morning before school, Hope would find Grizz at the kitchen table, attempting to style her hair into neat braids. His large fingers, more accustomed to motorcycle repairs than hair care, would carefully section and weave until everything looked just right. He'd learned from Sister Louisa and countless YouTube tutorials, never giving up until he got it perfect. The words began flowing onto the page. Hope wrote about the park where she was found, about the note that named her, and about the ex-biker who chose to become a father. She described how Grizz would sit through every dance recital, how he'd learned to cook soul food with Sister Louisa, and how he'd defended her against anyone who dared question their family. "My father doesn't share my skin color," she wrote, "but he shares my heart. He taught me that family isn't about matching appearances. It's about matching souls." When her teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, read the essay, tears welled up in her eyes. "Hope, this needs to be shared. The state contest deadline is tomorrow. May I submit it? 3 weeks later, Hope clutched the envelope from the Oregon State Writing Association. Her hands trembled as she read the letter. First place, high school division. Dad! She called out, running to the garage where Grizz was organizing his tools. Dad, I won! Grizz turned, wiping his hands on an old rag. Won what, baby girl? The essay contest. The one about you. About us. His weathered face broke into a broad smile. But before he could respond, Hope's phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Reynolds. The local news station wanted to interview them both. They'd seen the essay and wanted to share their story. The next day, a young reporter and cameraman arrived at their house. Grizz wore his nicest flannel shirt, though he kept tugging at the collar nervously. The reporter positioned them on their front porch, Hope sitting close to her father. So, Mr. Mallory, the reporter began, how does it feel to be the subject of such a moving essay? Grizz shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Well, he cleared his throat. I'm just her dad, doing what dads are supposed to do. He glanced at Hope, his eyes softening. She's the real hero here. Smart as a whip, kind heart. Everything good in her. That's all her own doing. Hope reached over and squeezed his hand. That's not true, Dad. Everything good in me. I learned from you. The reporter dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The cameraman zoomed in on their joined hands. One large and weathered, covered in faded tattoos. The other small and brown, holding on tight. By evening, the story had been shared thousands of times on social media. Local stations picked it up, then national ones. Hope's essay, The Man Who Saved Me, was being read across the country, touching hearts and changing minds about what makes a family. The auditorium lights dimmed as Hope walked onto the TEDx youth stage, her bright yellow dress a stark contrast against the deep red carpet. At 17, she carried herself with a grace that made Grizz's heart swell with pride. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, tugging at the collar of the dress shirt Hope had insisted he wear for the occasion. My story begins in a park, Hope started, her voice clear and strong. Not with a mother's embrace or in a hospital room, but under an oak tree where a man with tattoos and a Harley found a baby wrapped in an old army blanket. Grizz watched from the front row, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. The giant screen behind Hope showed a photo of them from her early years. Him, with his gray beard and leather vest, carefully holding a tiny black baby in his arms. People often ask me what it's like having a father who looks nothing like me, Hope continued, pacing the stage with natural confidence. They expect a story of hardship, of feeling out of place. But what I tell them is this: love doesn't see color. Love sees midnight feedings and Band-Aids on scraped knees. Love sees a man who learned to braid hair from YouTube videos and who sat through every tea party I ever hosted. The audience chuckled warmly. Grizz ducked his head, remembering those early days of fumbling with hair ties and watching endless tutorials on his old laptop. My father taught me that family isn't about matching skin or sharing blood. It's about choice. Every day, he chose me. Every time someone stared or whispered, he chose me again. When I asked him why my skin was different from his, he said, because God knew exactly what kind of daughter I needed. Tears welled in Grizz's eyes. He could feel the stares of nearby audience members, but for once, he didn't mind. Hope's voice grew stronger as she continued. Some people see an ex-biker with a troubled past. I see the man who read me Goodnight Moon every night until I memorized it. They see tattoos and scars. I see the hands that taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework. The screen behind her showed more photos. Grizz pushing Hope on a swing, the two of them at her middle school graduation, and a recent one of them working in their small garden together. My father isn't perfect, Hope said, her own eyes glistening now. But he's perfect for me. He taught me that redemption isn't just a word. It's a choice we make every single day. And sometimes, that choice looks like a rough-looking man with a big heart stopping his motorcycle because he heard a baby cry. The audience rose to their feet as Hope finished, their applause thunderous. Grizz remained seated, tears streaming freely down his face now. He didn't bother wiping them away. Hope spotted him and smiled, and in that smile was every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every proud moment they'd ever shared. Later that night, Grizz sat on their worn porch swing, still in his dress clothes. The spring air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from their garden. Hope had gone to celebrate with her friends, but not before giving him a fierce hug and whispering, "I love you, Dad." He looked up at the stars, thinking about the long road that had brought them here. The violence of his past, the mistakes he'd made, the daughter he'd lost to addiction. It all seemed like another lifetime. Now, watching Hope grow into this amazing young woman, he allowed himself a moment of peace. "Maybe I didn't ruin everything after all," he whispered to the night sky. The fellowship hall buzzed with excitement. Colorful balloons and congratulations. Banners decorated the walls, and a hand-painted sign read, "Howard University, Class of 2024. Sister Louisa had outdone herself with the decorations, turning the simple church space into a celebration worthy of Hope's achievement. Hope stood near the punch bowl in a yellow sundress, her braids adorned with small white flowers. Her smile lit up the room as she accepted hugs and well wishes from church members who had watched her grow up. The acceptance letter, now slightly crumpled from being read countless times, sat in a position of honor next to a cake decorated in Howard's blue and white colors. Grizz hung back, watching from the corner. He'd traded his usual worn jeans for pressed khakis, and even put on a tie, though he'd loosened it the moment he arrived. His weathered hands fidgeted with a small note card, words he'd been practicing all week. Sister Louisa clinked her glass with a spoon. "Everyone, if we could gather round. Mr. Mallory would like to say a few words about our star student." The room quieted as Grizz made his way to the front. He cleared his throat, looking down at his note card before shoving it back in his pocket. His voice was gruff with emotion. 17 years ago, I found something in a park that changed my life forever." He paused, looking at Hope. "Some folks call it chance. Others call it fate. Me? I call it my miracle." Hope's eyes welled up as he continued. "This little girl, well, not so little anymore. She saved me more than I ever saved her. She taught me what love really means." His voice cracked slightly. "And now she's going to one of the finest universities in the country, on a full ride. Because that's who my daughter is. She shines so bright. She lights up everything around her." Several of the church ladies dabbed at their eyes with tissues as Grizz finished, "I'm the proudest father in the world today. To Hope." "To Hope!" the room echoed, raising their glasses. Hope rushed forward to hug him, burying her face in his chest like she used to do as a little girl. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. The party continued with cake and punch, stories and laughter. Church members shared memories of Hope growing up. Her first Sunday school play, her poetry readings, the time she organized a fundraiser for the local shelter. Through it all, Grizz watched with quiet pride, occasionally running a hand over his eyes, when he thought no one was looking. As the celebration wound down, Hope and Grizz began gathering paper plates and cups. They worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of years spent together. Hope gathered leftover napkins while Grizz folded the card tables. In the quiet of the nearly empty fellowship hall, Hope stopped, holding a stack of plates. She looked at the Howard banner, then back at her father. "Dad?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Yeah, sweetheart." Do you ever think about where I came from? Grizz set down the table he was folding. His shoulders tensed slightly, but he met her eyes directly. After a moment, he nodded solemnly. The boxes were all packed, neatly labeled with Hope's precise handwriting. Her bedroom looked bare now, with only a few precious items left on the shelves. Grizz sat on the edge of her bed, watching as she folded her last few shirts, her movements slow and deliberate. "Dad?" Hope's voice was soft, but there was an edge to it that made Grizz's chest tighten. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, his weathered hands clasped together. "Anything, sweetheart." Hope stopped folding and turned to face him. The setting sun through her window cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. "I need to know about my birth mother." The words hung heavy in the air. Grizz's throat went dry. He'd known this moment would come, had dreaded it for years. His large frame seemed to shrink as he reached into his back pocket, pulling out his worn leather wallet. "I've kept this all these years," he said, his voice rough as he carefully unfolded the yellowed piece of paper. "Found it with you that day in the park." Hope's hands trembled slightly as she took the note. Her eyes scanned the faded words. "Her name is Hope. Please give her a better life." "That's all?" she whispered, turning the paper over, searching for more. "And you never tried to find out more?" Grizz ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared that if I went looking, someone might try to take you away. Scared that knowing might hurt you more than not knowing." "But it was my history, Dad." Hope's voice cracked. "My story. You had no right to keep this from me." She stood up, the note clutched in her hand. "All these years, I could have known something about where I came from, who I am." "Hope, you know who you are?" Grizz started, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "Do I? Because right now, I feel like there's this huge part of me that's just missing. And you had this piece of it all along." Tears welled in her eyes. "I wrote about you, defended you to everyone who questioned our family. I told the whole world how you saved me, how you were all I needed. And the whole time, you were hiding this." Grizz felt the familiar weight of shame settle on his shoulders. "I thought I was protecting you." "From what?" Hope's voice rose slightly. "From knowing my own truth. From having a chance to understand why I was left in that park." She shook her head, wiping angrily at her tears. "You should have told me." Without another word, she turned and walked to her bedroom door. There was no dramatic slam, just the soft click of the latch as she closed it behind her, leaving Grizz alone with the weight of his mistake. For the first time in 17 years, Hope didn't say goodnight to her father. The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Grizz loaded Hope's bags into the trunk of his old Chevy. Each suitcase felt heavier than the last, weighted down with 18 years of memories and one night of unspoken words. Hope stood on the porch, her arms crossed, watching him work. "That's the last one," Grizz said, his voice gruff from lack of sleep. Dark circles ringed his eyes, evidence of a night spent staring at his ceiling, replaying their argument over and over. Hope nodded, her usual warm smile replaced by a tight-lipped expression. She wore her Howard University sweatshirt, a gift from the church ladies who'd helped raise her. The sight of it made Grizz's chest ache. The drive to the bus station was silent, except for the radio's soft country music. Grizz kept sneaking glances at his daughter, trying to memorize her face. The morning light caught her dark curls, curls he'd learned to braid with patient instruction from Sister Louisa all those years ago. "You got your ticket?" he asked, as they pulled into the station's parking lot. "Yes." Hope's answer was clipped, final. They walked side by side toward the waiting bus, maintaining a careful distance between them. Around them, other families hugged and cried, taking pictures and making promises to call. Grizz's hands felt empty, useless at his sides. "Your dorm information is in your backpack," he said, his voice catching. "And there's some extra money in the envelope." "I know, Dad." The word Dad hung between them, heavy with everything left unsaid. Hope turned to face him finally, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. "I just don't understand why you never looked. All these years?" Grizz reached for her, then let his hand drop. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of losing you. You could have trusted me more than that." Hope adjusted her backpack, looking at the bus where other students were already boarding. "I know that now," Grizz said softly. "I know." The bus driver called out the final boarding call. Hope picked up her carry-on bag, and for a moment, Grizz saw that tiny baby he'd found under the tree, wrapped in an army blanket. His miracle. "Call when you get there," he managed to say. Hope nodded, then turned and walked toward the bus without hugging him goodbye. Grizz watched her climb the steps, find her seat by a window. She didn't look out at him as the bus pulled away. The drive home felt endless. His house, usually warmed by Hope's presence, felt cold and empty. Photos of her growing up lined the walls. Dance recitals, school plays, award ceremonies, each one a reminder of what he might have lost. As evening approached, Grizz found himself driving to Portland, to the small park where it had all begun. The old oak tree still stood, its branches reaching toward a darkening sky. He parked his truck and walked to the spot where he'd found her, the folded note burning in his pocket where he'd carried it every day for 18 years. Sitting on the same bench, he pulled out the weathered paper. The ink had faded, but the words were etched in his memory. "Her name is Hope. Please give her a better life." His hands trembled as he read the words aloud to the empty park, his voice rough with emotion. Birds called in the distance as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors it had been that day 18 years ago when he'd found his reason for living. Regina Coleman sat in her favorite armchair, sipping chamomile tea while scrolling through news articles on her tablet. The evening light filtered through her lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across her living room in Augusta, Georgia. At 68, she had developed a habit of keeping up with inspiring stories to share with her church group. A video thumbnail caught her eye, a young black woman giving a TEDx talk titled, "The Man Who Saved Me." Regina clicked play, settling back into her chair. As the story unfolded about a former Hell's Angel who had found and raised an abandoned baby, something stirred in her memory. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. The speaker mentioned a note, and Regina's heart skipped a beat. She remembered that day 18 years ago as if it were yesterday, sitting at her kitchen table with a terrified 17-year-old girl named Alana, helping her write the hardest words she'd ever have to put on paper. "Her name is Hope," Regina whispered along with the video. "Please, give her a better life." She pressed pause and walked to her study, where she kept decades of journals documenting her work with troubled young women. Her fingers found the worn leather volume from 18 years ago. There, in neat handwriting, she had recorded that rainy afternoon when Alana had come to her, desperate and afraid. Regina's hands shook as she read her own words from that day. "Helped A, write note today. Baby girl, named Hope. Praying someone kind finds her." She returned to her living room and replayed the video 3 times, studying the faces of both Hope and her adoptive father. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched their story unfold. The love, the challenges, the triumph of an unlikely family. "Lord have mercy," Regina murmured, reaching for her phone. She dialed the local news station that had originally shared Hope's story. After being transferred twice, she finally reached a young producer. "Ma'am, how can I help you today?" the producer asked. Regina's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "I have information about Hope Mallory's birth mother. I was there the day that note was written. I helped write it." There was a long pause on the other end. "Could you please hold for a moment?" Within minutes, Regina found herself speaking with the senior producer. She explained her role as a community counselor, how she had worked with young women in crisis for over 30 years. She described that day with Alana. The fear, the tears, the impossible choice. "I've kept records," Regina explained. "I have the date, the circumstances, everything. I never knew what happened to that baby, but I prayed for her every day. When I saw that video," her voice caught. "I knew. I just knew." The producer's voice grew excited. "Mrs. Coleman, would you be willing to share your documentation? This could be incredibly important to Hope and her father." "Of course," Regina said. "That's why I'm calling. That girl deserves to know her whole story. And from what I've seen, her daddy deserves to know he didn't just save one life that day. He saved two." The producer took down Regina's contact information, promising to reach out to Hope and Grizz immediately. As she hung up the phone, Regina looked at the paused video on her tablet. Hope's bright smile frozen on the screen. "Look at God's timing," she whispered, touching the screen gently. "All these years, and now everything's coming full circle." Hope sat cross-legged on her dorm room bed, her phone pressed to her ear. Her heart pounded as she listened to Grizz's gravelly voice on the other end. "Baby girl, the news station got a call," he said softly. "Someone named Regina Coleman saw your video. Says she knows about the note." Hope's fingers tightened around her phone. "What? How?" "She says—" Grizz paused, clearing his throat. "She says she helped write it. Says she knows your birth mother." The world seemed to tilt beneath Hope. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. Her roommate glanced over with concern, but Hope waved her away. Is my mother—" "Alive," Grizz finished. "Her name is Alana Brooks. Regina says she's doing real good now, working as a social worker in Georgia." Hope let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Tears pricked at her eyes, as 18 years of questions suddenly had answers within reach. "Regina wants to arrange a meeting," Grizz continued. His voice was gentle, careful. "Says Alana's been sober for 15 years. She's helped other women get clean too." Hope wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Did she say why? Why she left me?" Regina didn't share everything over the phone, but she said there was abuse involved. Said Alana was just a teenager, trying to protect you. The silence stretched between them. Hope could hear Grizz's steady breathing, waiting, patient as always. "I don't know if I can," Hope whispered. What if it changes everything?" "Nothing changes what we are to each other," Grizz said firmly. "You're my daughter, period. But maybe knowing where you come from might help fill in some pieces." Hope picked at a loose thread on her bedspread. "Would you be there if I said yes? Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The familiar phrase made Hope smile through her tears. It was what he always said before her piano recitals, her speeches, her graduation. "Regina suggested meeting here in Oregon," Grizz added. "Says Alana's willing to fly out. Thanksgiving break is coming up." Hope's heart raced at the thought. It all felt so real suddenly, no longer just wondering, but actually meeting the woman who gave her life, who left her in that park, who trusted that someone would find her. "What do you think, Dad?" She needed his guidance now more than ever. "Should I do this?" Grizz was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that sometimes the scariest choices are the ones worth making. But it's your decision, baby girl. No pressure, either way." Hope took a deep breath, thinking of the note she'd read so many times since that night before college, the handwriting that had haunted her dreams, the questions that had always lingered. "Okay," she said finally. "Tell Regina yes. I'll book a flight home for Thanksgiving break." "You sure?" "No," Hope admitted with a weak laugh. "But I need to know. And I'm glad you'll be there with me." "Always," Grizz promised. "We'll face this together." Hope nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Together," she repeated softly. The local diner buzzed with afternoon activity, but the corner booth remained oddly still. Grizz sat with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. Hope fidgeted with her napkin, folding and unfolding it until the paper grew soft. They'd arrived early, wanting to be settled when Regina and Alana showed up. When the bell above the door chimed, Hope's head snapped up. Regina entered first, a dignified woman in her 60s, wearing a royal blue dress and carrying herself with quiet authority. Behind her, hesitating in the doorway, stood Alana. Grizz's breath caught. The woman was younger than him, maybe in her mid-30s, with warm brown skin and Hope's same delicate features. She wore simple clothes, dark jeans and a cream sweater, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. "Hello," Regina spoke first, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm Regina Coleman, and this is Alana Brooks." Hope stood up so quickly her knee bumped the table, making the silverware rattle. "Hi," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. Alana took a small step forward, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at Hope. "You're so beautiful," she breathed. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to touch. Grizz cleared his throat and gestured to the empty seats. "Please, sit down." Regina slid into the booth first, but Alana remained standing, her gaze fixed on Hope. Mother and daughter studied each other, mirror images separated by 18 years of life. Alana started, then stopped. She wrapped her arms around herself as if holding something in. "I've thought about this moment every day since." Hope nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Me too." The waitress approached with menus, but quickly backed away, sensing the gravity of the moment. Grizz wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but words failed him. "I was 16, Alana finally said, her voice cracking. "My home wasn't safe. I couldn't—" She pressed her lips together, fighting for control. "Regina helped me write that note. She said to give you a name that meant something. That meant everything." Hope reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the worn piece of paper, the note Grizz had kept all these years. Alana's hand flew to her mouth when she saw it. "You kept it," she whispered. "Dad did," Hope replied, glancing at Grizz. "He saved everything important." Alana finally sat down, her movements careful, as if she might shatter. "I want you to know," she said, "that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. But when I saw the story, when I saw who found you—" She looked at Grizz with tear-filled eyes. "I couldn't have dreamed of someone loving you more." Hope reached across the table, her hand hovering uncertainly in the space between them. "Can I—" Alana nodded, and their fingers intertwined. The gesture was simple, but profound, bridging years of questions and wondering. "Thank you for giving me life," Hope said softly, squeezing Alana's hand. Alana broke down then, years of carried guilt and love pouring out in quiet sobs. From his place at the edge of the booth, Grizz watched his daughter comfort the woman who had given her to him. His heart swelled with pride, even as it ached, knowing that this moment would change everything. Hope and Alana sat in the small garden behind Grizz's house, the morning sun warming their shoulders. 2 steaming mugs of coffee sat untouched on the weathered picnic table between them. The past 2 days had been filled with careful conversations, each word chosen with delicate precision. "I was 17, Alana began, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "My mother's boyfriend." She paused, drawing a deep breath. "He was violent, not just to her, but to everyone in the house." Hope listened intently, her dark eyes fixed on the woman who had given her life. Alana's face held echoes of Hope's own features, the same high cheekbones, the same gentle curve of the jaw. "When I found out I was pregnant with you, I knew I couldn't keep you there. That house—" Alana's voice cracked. "It wasn't safe for anyone, especially not a baby." A robin landed nearby, pecking at the ground. Hope watched it, giving Alana time to collect herself. "Regina. She worked at the women's shelter where I'd hide sometimes. She helped me plan everything. Alana wiped a tear from her cheek. We chose that park because it was quiet, but people still came through often enough. I knew someone would find you quickly. Hope reached across the table and touched Alana's hand. Were you scared? Terrified, Alana admitted. I stayed hidden behind the trees until I saw that biker, your father, find you. I watched him call for help. The gentleness in his hands when he picked you up. She smiled through her tears. I never expected that. Dad can be gentle as a lamb, Hope said softly. Most people don't see past the tattoos. Alana nodded. After that day, I got help, got clean, went back to school, became a social worker. She squeezed Hope's hand. I wanted to make something of myself, to be worthy of the daughter I had to let go. But you never looked for me. I was afraid, Alana confessed. Afraid I'd mess up your life, afraid you'd hate me. Then I saw your essay online. Her voice trembled. I saw how loved you were, how happy, how successful you've become. Hope stood up and walked around the table, sitting next to Alana on the wooden bench. I used to imagine so many different reasons why my birth mother left me. I thought maybe you didn't want me, or didn't care. Oh, baby, Alana whispered. I loved you so much I had to let you go. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Hope wrapped her arms around Alana, feeling the woman's shoulders shake with quiet sobs. You were strong to let me go, Hope said softly, her own tears falling. But he was strong to raise me. They embraced, holding each other tightly in the morning sunlight. The evening air wrapped around them like a familiar blanket, as Grizz and Hope sat on the creaking wooden porch swing. The same swing where he'd read her bedtime stories, where they'd shared ice cream cones on hot summer nights, and where they'd had countless talks about life's big and small moments. The stars twinkled above, just as they had done all those years ago when he'd first brought her home. Hope pulled her knees up to her chest, looking so much like that uncertain little girl who used to sit in the exact same way. Dad, she started, her voice soft but steady. I'm sorry about how I left things. I was angry, but not really at you. I was angry at everything, I guess. Grizz's weathered hands gripped the edge of the swing. The tattoos that had once marked him as an outlaw now seemed faded, like memories of a different life. You had every right to be angry, kid. I should have told you about the note sooner. No. Hope shook her head, her curls catching the porch light. I understand now. After talking with Alana, with my birth mother. I get it. You were protecting me. You always have. The swing creaked gently as they rocked. Grizz remembered all the nights he'd spent out here, wondering if he was doing right by her. I was scared, he admitted, his gruff voice barely above a whisper. Scared you'd want to find your real family and leave. Hope reached over and placed her hand over his. The contrast of her dark skin against his pale, lined hands made him think of all the times people had stared, questioned, doubted, but never Hope, never his girl. That's the thing, Dad, she said, squeezing his hand. I already had my real family. You're it. Meeting Alana. It filled in some blanks, helped me understand where I came from. But it didn't change who I am, or who made me that person. Grizz felt the familiar sting of tears. He'd cried more in the years raising Hope than in all his previous decades combined. I didn't know what I was doing half the time, he confessed. Just tried to give you what I never had. You gave me everything, Hope said, leaning her head against his shoulder, like she used to do as a child. You gave me love without conditions. You gave me strength by showing me it's never too late to change. You gave me pride in who I am, even when others questioned us. The night settled around them, peaceful and warm. Crickets chirped their evening song, and somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle rumbled past, a sound that used to represent his whole world, before a tiny cry in a park changed everything. Hope straightened up and looked at him, her eyes shining with tears and determination. Meeting Alana. It made me realize something important. She gave me life, and I'll always be grateful. But you, Dad, you taught me how to live it. Grizz swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He remembered the first time she'd called him Dad. She'd been 3, and it had felt like a miracle. Now, at 18, each time she said it felt just as precious. "You'll always be my dad," Hope said softly, but with conviction. Grizz took a deep breath, steadying himself. "And you'll always be my reason." The moving truck pulled away from Grizz's new townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia, leaving him standing in the driveway with a cardboard box labeled Hope's Baby Photos in his weathered hands. The spring air carried the scent of cherry blossoms, so different from the pine-filled Oregon breeze he'd known for nearly 2 decades. "You didn't have to move across the country, Dad," Hope had told him when he'd announced his decision. But the empty rooms back home had echoed with too many memories. And at 63, Grizz wasn't ready to fade into a quiet retirement. His new place was smaller, but it was only 15 minutes from Howard University, where Hope was thriving in her sophomore year. The walls were still bare, except for that first photo of them. The one from the courthouse steps 18 years ago. Him looking terrified and proud all at once, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink. 3 weeks after settling in, Grizz found himself walking into the Riverside Youth Center. The brick building had seen better days, but the sounds of teenagers laughing and shooting hoops in the gymnasium filled the space with life. "Mr. Mallory," the director, Ms. Thompson, greeted him with a warm handshake. "We're so glad you reached out about volunteering. Your experience with at-risk youth could be invaluable here." Grizz rubbed his neck, his tattoos visible beneath his collar. "Just Grizz is fine. And I wouldn't say I have experience. Just lived it, both sides of the fence." The teens were wary of him at first. His size, his scars, his gruff voice, all marked him as someone to avoid. But then came Marcus, a 14-year-old with anger in his eyes that Grizz recognized all too well. "You don't know nothing about my life," Marcus had spat during their first conversation. Grizz just nodded. "Maybe not. But I know about choosing between what's easy and what's right. About finding hope when everybody's given up on you." He shared his story, not all at once, but in pieces. About the violence he'd left behind. About finding a baby in a park. About learning to braid hair and read bedtime stories. About love being stronger than blood. Word spread. More teens started dropping by his office. Really just a converted storage room with 2 chairs and a coffee maker. They came with questions about their homework, their families, their futures. Grizz didn't have all the answers, but he had something better. He listened. Hope visited often, bringing him lunch and sometimes staying to help with the center's writing workshop. The teens loved her. This poised young woman who'd grown up with a tattooed ex-biker for a father and was now studying law with dreams of advocating for foster children. One morning, 6 months after he'd started volunteering, Ms. Thompson called him into her office. On her desk sat a framed photograph, one taken at the center's summer barbecue. In it, Grizz and Hope were surrounded by laughing teenagers, father and daughter both beaming at the camera. "We'd like to hang this in the main hallway," Ms. Thompson said, turning the frame to show him the simple caption beneath. "Love builds families." Grizz stared at the photo, at the joy in Hope's smile, at the pride in his own eyes. He thought about that day in the park 18 years ago, how one cry had changed everything, how love had built his family, one day at a time. "Yeah," he said gruffly, clearing his throat. "That'd be all right." The next morning, the photo hung where everyone could see it, a testament to second chances, to choices that changed lives, to the family that love built. The late May sun warmed the crowded Howard University auditorium as thousands gathered for the graduation ceremony. Grizz sat in his pressed blue suit, the same one he'd worn to Hope's high school graduation, fidgeting with his tie. His weathered hands, covered in faded tattoos, gripped the printed program until it crinkled. "Dad, you're going to wrinkle it," whispered Alana, who sat beside him. Over the past year, she'd become a regular presence in their lives. And today, she beamed with the same pride that made Griz's heart feel ready to burst. The university president approached the podium, his voice carrying through the packed hall. And now, delivering this year's commencement address, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in social work, Hope Mallory. Griz's breath caught as Hope walked to the podium. Her graduation cap sat perfectly atop her carefully styled curls, and her red honor cords swayed with each confident step. She looked so different from that tiny bundle he'd found under the oak tree, yet her smile still held that same light that had first captured his heart. 18 years ago, Hope began, her voice strong and clear. A man found a baby, abandoned beneath a tree in a Portland park. She paused, her eyes finding Grizz in the crowd. That man was a former Hell's Angel, covered in tattoos, with a past he was trying to outrun. He had every reason to walk away, to call someone else, to make it someone else's problem. But he didn't. Grizz felt tears welling up as Hope continued. Instead, he chose love. He chose to fight for custody of a black baby girl when everyone told him he couldn't possibly be the right person for the job. He learned to braid hair from church ladies. He read books about black history so he could teach me where I came from. He sat through every dance recital, every parent-teacher conference, every moment of doubt and joy. The audience sat captivated as Hope shared their story. People often asked him why. Why would a man like him take on such a responsibility? His answer was always the same. Because she needed me. But the truth is, we needed each other. He named me Hope because that's what he found that day in the park. And in raising me, he found his redemption. Grizz wiped his eyes with a bandana he kept in his pocket. Alana reached over and squeezed his hand. My father taught me that family isn't about matching skin or shared blood. It's about the choice to love someone unconditionally every single day. He taught me that it's never too late to change your life, to open your heart, to become the person you were meant to be. Hope's voice grew stronger as she concluded. As we graduate today, we're all stepping into a world that often seems divided, fearful, and uncertain. But I learned from my father that the most powerful thing we can do is choose love, even when, especially when, it doesn't make sense to anyone else. She straightened her shoulders, her eyes shining. So, I challenge each of you. Be like that tattooed biker who stopped in a park 18 years ago. Choose love. Choose to see past appearances. Choose to believe in second chances. Choose to be the miracle someone else is praying for. The crowd rose to their feet, applause thundering through the auditorium. Grizz stood, tears flowing freely now, his large frame shaking with emotion. From the stage, Hope's eyes locked with his, and she blew him a kiss, her smile radiant with love and gratitude. The evening air was warm and sweet as Grizz kicked his Harley to life. The old motorcycle purred beneath him, restored to its former glory through years of careful maintenance. Hope, now a college graduate, climbed on behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist just as she had done countless times during her teenage years. "Ready for one last ride, Dad?" she asked, squeezing him tight. Grizz nodded, his throat too tight for words. The familiar weight of his daughter behind him felt right, like coming home. They pulled out onto the winding road that led to the park, the same route he'd taken that fateful day 18 years ago. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in soft golden light. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches creating dancing shadows on the pavement. Hope rested her head against his back, and through his leather jacket, he could feel her steady heartbeat. "I remember when you first taught me to ride," Hope said loud enough to be heard over the engine. "I was so scared, but you told me to trust you." Grizz smiled, remembering that day. She'd been 14, terrified but determined. Just like everything else in her life, She'd mastered it with grace. The bike's engine echoed off the trees as they curved through the familiar bends. Every mile brought back memories, teaching Hope to ride a bicycle on these roads. Weekend picnics, quiet walks where they'd talk about life's big questions. The park entrance appeared ahead, looking smaller than Grizz remembered. He slowed the bike, letting it idle through the entrance. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as they followed the narrow path to the parking area. Nothing much had changed. The same wooden benches, the same walking trails, the same massive oak tree standing sentinel over it all. Grizz cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy with meaning. Hope dismounted first, pulling off her helmet. Her braids caught the late sunlight, the beads at the ends clicking softly as she moved. She reached out and took Grizz's weathered hand in hers, leading him toward the oak tree. Their boots crushed fallen leaves as they walked. Hope traced her fingers over the tree's rough bark, her eyes distant with thought. The branches above them rustled in the evening breeze, as if the old oak remembered too. "It's strange," Hope said softly. "I've imagined this place so many times. But being here—" She paused, looking around at the quiet park. "It feels like sacred ground." Grizz squeezed her hand, his chest tight with emotion. The memories of that day were as clear as if they'd happened yesterday. The faint cry that had caught his attention. The bundle wrapped in an army blanket. The note that had changed both their lives forever. Hope looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The setting sun caught her face, highlighting the strength and beauty that had always been there, waiting to bloom. She stood tall and proud, every bit the remarkable woman he'd hoped she'd become. "This is where I was found," she said quietly, her voice full of wonder. Grizz shook his head, his own eyes growing misty. "No, sweetheart. This is where I was saved." The sun sank lower on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Its last rays filtered through the oak's branches, blessing the spot where a broken man had found his redemption in a tiny bundle of hope. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.